if we don't hush up, and that we don't want that. All right, is everybody's here? We've got everybody. Guido, can you call the? I'm calling it to order. You call the roll. We'll split the job. You're on mute. So this is going well. We can't hear you.
He's waving his hands.
Does anybody read sign language?
You need to unmute your computer. No, we can't hear you.
No.
It looks like your screen is muted. There.
There.
All right, let's try again. Councilmember Abbott,
Here.
Councilmember Del Prado,
Here.
Councilmember Hokumer,
Here.
Vice Mayor Kraft,
Here.
Mayor Cordino.
I am. All right, so let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm sure everyone has a flag in their house, so we'll just turn to that and pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Ta-da. Okay, discussion. Yossi, we still have one presentation. Michelle was out last time. She was going to be available to do a presentation.
Yeah, we have a quick presentation. I promise it's quick from
Okay.
the communications manager. Just wanted her to give you an update on her efforts this last year. And then we'll go ahead and get started with discussion on for the other items.
So before we get started, I just wanted to say a few words. I was going back through the strategic plan and thinking about what we were talking about last time. And I began to think that we're starting to diverge a little bit from what our or at least my ultimate goal for this was. And to make it as simple as possible, I think the most productive thing that we could probably do if we come out of this meeting, because I don't want to get in, I'm not a detailed person on this type of stuff, is for each council member to think of the top things that they wanted to get done in the next year, 2 years, or 4 years. And it doesn't have to be any set number. And I'm betting that if we looked at our top 10 list or top 5 list, that we would have 5 things or more things than we could pay for that we all agreed on. And then we should probably focus our efforts on accomplishing those things because they would seem to be the easiest things in the world. We would have complete consensus on it. We probably don't have enough money to accomplish all of those things. And if we came up with that list individually and then collectively, I think we would have a great agenda for the next 2 and 4 years to get accomplished. And I think that these types of preform conversations are great to kind of spitball those ideas around it. It could be something crazy. It could be something that we've always wanted to do. We can just have the latitude to think, explore an idea. And if it's a bad idea, we're not committed to it. We haven't gone too far down the road and the such. So if anybody likes that idea or hates that idea, let me know. We don't have to come up with our list today, but probably if we do this again in the next round for a little while, it would be a good idea to get that list. And with that, I'll turn it over to Yossi. If anybody has any comments on that, I'll take it. Not Yossi, you got Michelle. Does anybody think that's a terrible idea? Well, that's a good start. Anybody think it's a good idea? All right, good. We got 1, 2. All right. Yossi?
Okay, I'm just gonna ask Guido to let Michelle Hammondtree into the meeting and she'll do a slideshow. Michelle, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. If can somebody allow me to share my screen, please? Okay. Okay. So this is the 2020-2021 Communications Division Strategic Plan. The division overarching goals have been for years now to drive traffic to the website, to use digital marketing best practices to maximize promotion budgets, and to ensure that all messaging aligns with the Village Council strategic priorities. The 2020-21 goal, let me move your little heads over because I can't read this. Okay. The 2021 goal is to enhance digital media literacy and interdepartmental collaboration across all departments for improved organization-wide efficiency. The strategies that we've put in place is that we've been holding communication meetings every 2 weeks since September 2020. We've been providing communications training once a quarter. We've implemented cloud-based software, and we're slowly but surely closing the communications loop. The communications training that we've provided so far is BizHack, a digital training, a digital marketing academy, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to train staff. We did that sometime in October of last year, October, November. We also provided BizHack for small businesses in Pinecrest to help with the COVID recovery. And we have ongoing training on the new cloud-based platforms that we've implemented. Our strategic actions have been to hold the communication meetings every 2 weeks since September. Interdepartmental staff or interdepartmental communication staff is currently learning how to use the new team platforms, which include Hootsuite, Monday, and Eventbrite. Another platform that managers are starting to use is called Zencity, which is an artificial intelligence analytics platform. Move your little heads again. So as I alluded to earlier, communications is output and input. So staff is focusing on closing the communications loop by learning what the community is saying through traditional metrics and artificial intelligence, which is the Zencity platform. It analyzes millions of data points. It helps inform decisions and get ahead of any potential issues arising from inaccurate news or the like. Zencity is a performance management cloud-based software. It helps local governments translate what people want in their cities more effectively. The platform analyzes digital touch points that residents have with and about their local government. Those real-time insights are provided in a dashboard. Additionally, a Zencity analyst delivers insight reports regularly. This is an example of the dashboard. This is for the last 7 days. You can see Katie or Councilmember Abbott is one of the top leading stories for Pinecrest. It's a snapshot of trending topics that residents and visitors are talking about online, which includes social media, broadcast, digital news, all within a customizable time period. That begins when we started the contract with Zencity, which was sometime in December of 2020. Users can open projects to get more insight about a specific issue to inform decision-making. An example is recently our Parks and Rec director, he asked to put a project together that has to do with senior citizen activity because he's trying to gauge what our senior citizens would like to do. One of his new programs is pickleball, and apparently it's very successful. Here's a Zencity case study. Officials in the village of Bolingbrook, Illinois, got ahead of an upcoming issue about its farmers market by listening to what residents were talking about. Residents were saying the market wasn't safe. Officials showed the inside report to the market vendors to persuade them to implement safety measures, which increased sales and reduced negative sentiment about the city. Which, if I can go back for a second, ooh, sorry, hold on. So if you look here, everything is green. So our sentiment is all good. Sometimes you'll find some red in there, which happened recently with the FBI shootings, because they would mention the FBI shooting that we had here in the village. But right now, everything is good, everything is green. So overall insight to date, the village is becoming a more efficient organization by implementing 2020 and 2021 communication strategies. Village staff is enhancing its knowledge of digital media organization-wide. Zencity is comparable to having a communication analyst on board. The village is working toward closing the communications loop on an organization-wide scale. And I'm done.
Great. I have one question. So how does that work? If we have a social media posts on one of our platforms and
Right.
somebody says something negative about Pinecrest, so Pinecrest FBI shooting, that registers as a negative and it turns red? Or how does it exactly work?
It turns red, but since we know we're getting the information, so we're able to say, oh, it's red because we were tied back to the FBI shooting, that the first one that historically happened here in Pinecrest. We are aware that it's not something that is truly negative about the village. So when we analyze it and we want to give it to, a citizen, a vendor, or show it to, let's say, to council, we would make notes saying this is not actually a negative thing. It's just being tied to a negative event, which gives, obviously somebody died. It's negative sentiment.
So what'll happen moving forward as we kind of really get familiarized with the project, with the software, we can create projects. Like we can create a project about the Upper Garden project, right? And it starts to mine social media and any other platform for any type of feedback whatsoever having to do with that project. And by monitoring and analyzing that, we can try to get ahead of any misinformation that's being put out there so that then we can push new information that is accurate out. So it's just allowing us to have an ear and see it from a more macro level. And we can monitor everything. We can create a project about traffic in Pinecrest and see what people are saying about traffic. It can help. So, what we've normally done over the years has been to have a more traditional approach. We do customer surveys to our residents every, 3 to 5 years. We get information. Now with this is like more real time. We can do things through social media, put questions out, and then when you get feedback, that'll be picked up from through the artificial intelligence software, platform, and then give us immediate feedback, real-time feedback on what people are saying about different things.
It only picks up things that we're discussing. So for instance, if we were going to discuss a specific project that we're doing, we could get the feedback from the community back on that project.
Mine for that, but it also monitors every topic. So we have it so that any mention of Pinecrest will be picked up so that we can really have, because there might be topics being discussed that we're not aware of. But in addition to just mining all data for Pinecrest mentions, we also look, we want to know what people are talking about when it comes to crime in Pinecrest, let's say. And we can really see what the sentiment is about safety in Pinecrest, what the perception is. And that helps inform our communication strategy moving forward when we push out information to try to address those issues that may come up when we.
Okay, so we're just not monitoring the topics that we put out there on social media, but we're monitoring mentions of Pinecrest, positive or negative, over the entire internet.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. What if
Anything
there's another
digital.
Pinecrest?
Excuse me?
What is there another? It's like Springfield. Is there another Pinecrest
Right,
in
so
another state that we could?
Zencity filters those other Pinecrests out. So for example, before we had this, we had an application called Meltwater, and Meltwater wasn't, it was for marketing and for advertising and for communications, but it wasn't specifically targeted for local governments. So what this application has that one didn't was that it's able to filter out every other Pinecrest, because there's many places that have a Pinecrest street, they have a Pinecrest community center, they have a Pinecrest, retirement community, Pinecrest.
Cool.
Right. So what's nice about this application compared to Meltwater is that they focus on local cities. So immediately when they did their sales pitch, I talked about that, and they already knew that problem existed. And so they've made it so that it's always just about us. So they filter all that out. And to add to what Yossi was saying, not only do they mine the data with artificial intelligence, they also take it to an actual person who's an analyst, and they're able over time, since we just started in December, it's still new, but over time they're able to give us trends. They're able to like actually analyze the information and give us what they call an insight report.
So all that information will be coming in your reports. And then if there's anything of note that you want us to monitor, you can just ask us and we'll create a project specific for that. Like we can literally monitor what sentiment is about the farmers market. We can monitor what sentiments are about Pinecrest Gardens noise. We can monitor, like we could get as specific as we want, or, you know, about Airbnb issues in Pinecrest, like things like that. And we can literally just mine any social media platform, any kind of data platform, news outlets and stuff like that for any, you know, for information about that to help inform policy decisions in the future.
So if you have a question, whatever, I want to know what the buzz is on the internet about X, then we ask you, can you run a search on X? And then does it pull up specific posts, or what is, or does it tell you how many times it was mentioned?
Picks everything up, and yes, you'll be able to see everything.
You'll be able to see posts, you'll be able to see blogs, you'll be able to see anything that was broadcast and posted online. Anything that is under the digital umbrella, you'll be able to see. So for example, things you won't be able to see is, you know, if it was in a newspaper and it was print, they can't pick that up. But nowadays newspapers put everything that they put in print online. Closed groups on Facebook, they can't go into the closed books, but they can follow pages, they can follow, you know, our social media. They do anything they can within the legal limits digitally to provide us information.
Great resource.
It is, and it actually has created a lot of efficiencies for us because it is like having an analyst. And so we were talking about, it just closes that communications loop because we're always pushing information out. But what I think is helpful is when we have temperature on what the sentiment is back, you know, from the residents or business owners, we could hear and get some feedback on whatever we're doing. And if there's, you know, we can, you know, run, you know, tackle things proactively if we get negative feedback on anything ahead of, you know, ahead of the game. So it'll help us in that sense. Okay, so thank you, Michelle.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes,
I don't know if this is for Michelle or Yossi, but to go back to your very first point about what your first goal is to bring traffic back to the website. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought our website was being redesigned. We're getting a dashboard and everything. Am I crazy?
No.
I love our website. It's very useful, but I definitely think it could use an update.
So we have one of our strategic planning goals is to create a dashboard for the website. And when we get into discussions about the strategic plan, based on our last meeting, I started thinking like, how do we focus our energies to creating the dashboards that will be the key intended outcomes that will tell people we're doing a good job or not doing a good job on XYZ. So when we get into discussions on the different categories, the strategic categories that we have, I'll show you some of those ideas. And then there's a software platform that we're currently looking at. It's called Clearpoint. A lot of cities use it. You can, you know, pull it up and take a look at some of the dashboards. I can actually show it to you later. But if depending on cost, I mean, we're still pricing all that stuff out, but that will allow us to then create those data monitoring points and collect the data from the different systems that we have and inform those dashboards. So it is one of our long-term strategic goals, and we are working towards getting those up. And then obviously we'll have something on our website that allows that snapshot view for residents of, our metrics, whatever those may be. And I had offline conversations with some of the council members about like, what do residents care about? And so, when we get into providing information, like we need to think, like, if you remember our old strategic plan, we had a bunch of, performance measurements that we were monitoring and reporting on. And then we eventually were like, why are we doing this? Because it wasn't really informing anything for us. But like, we need to think, what do residents care about and what information do they want to see? So when we create these strategic, performance measurements, we're looking to communicate those things to them in addition to ourselves, obviously. But so you should have a critical eye when it comes to creating, what kind of data do we really need in order to show that we're doing a good job on XYZ or not. So I'll go over some of that a little bit when we get into, I've taken our strategic plan and we worked it in a different format that'll be a little more concise for you guys to look at. I'll explain to you when I show you. I haven't finished the whole document because it's extensive, but I think it'll get us through a good portion of it if we do it this way. Mayor, I don't know if you want me to do it that way, or do you want to discuss like those issues of that each individual council member would like to kind of focus on? How do you want to proceed?
Well, I don't know.
Mr.
If
Mayor,
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. Before you go on, though, I did want to answer Councilmember Abbott's question. Aside from the dashboard information that the manager discussed, there are no plans to revamp our website at this time. So I just wanted that to be clear, that that's not been discussed, nor is it planned anytime in the near future. The last time we did an upgrade of the website was about 4 years ago.
So
And if I could add,
I'm sorry, let me just say this, the website, the design of the website is what was revamped about 4 years ago. What's happening on the back end of the website is we're bringing everything up to ADA compliance. So we hired an ADA compliance clerk that is updating and putting all those documents that need to be. So we had to take a lot of stuff offline because they weren't ADA compliant. And so we're working towards bringing all those things to that. But if we create a dashboard, that's just a matter of creating a page, a landing page where people can go and then see those metrics. So, we can pretty much, we have a content management system that lets us make changes to our website and what it looks like, and what information we're pushing out and prioritizing. So we can do all those things already.
and as far as measuring the traffic that goes back to our website, we have metrics through Google Analytics where we can see how many visitors we have, how many people are going to a specific page. We also consider our owned media, which is our social media pages, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. They are also places that we drive traffic to, and we're also able to measure all that. It takes me, going on a few different platforms to put that information together, but we are measuring it, and we are doing a good job of driving traffic back either to the website or to owned media.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome. Nice seeing everybody.
All right, so I'm going to share.
Yeah, but I don't, if anybody's ready to discuss their top 10 list, that's okay. I would imagine we're all not at this point in time. So I'll let you just continue with whatever you had on your list for the agenda.
Okay.
And then as we get into it, if he wants to chime in on that. What time do we plan on concluding today?
It's up to you guys. So it's up to you. We can order lunch and have it delivered to everybody's homes. It's up to you, whatever you guys want to decide to do.
You got to stop at 1, correct?
I have a 1, yeah. I do.
I have a 1 as well. Let's see where we are at noon, and let's reserve, Yossi, how long do you think it'll take to start to work through this stuff?
I mean, it just depends how fast council wants to go and how much discussion, but I think there's like low hanging fruit. Like if you recall, what we did last time was when we went over the objectives, those that we accomplished, we automatically took off. I reported on it and we all agreed that those could come off. And then we were just looking at by category before we moved on from that category. If there was anything new that anyone wanted to propose, we can bring that up for that particular category. So that's how we've typically done it. I think the last discussion we were having was just trying to really like tighten up the understanding that the strategic plan should be more aspirational and really just try to move the organization into something that is better than what it is now. So that should be really, you know, our overarching goals when it comes to looking at the strategic plan and moving the community in a certain way. So let me just real quick show you the old plan look. Again, just to remind everybody, there's 6 categories, right? The strategic priorities that were identified years ago. I can tell you from looking at other strategic plans, there are other categories that we don't have. So I can talk a little bit about those as we finish the ones we've always focused on to see if there's any interest in expanding categories or not. But what the strategic plan document, the way it was set up before, it basically gave you the strategic priority, and then underneath that you had just different goals and action items. There in the older iterations of the strategic plan, we did have performance measurements tied to them that we kind of got away from because council was like, why are we really doing this? But if we're going to move back towards putting something for dashboard purposes to communicate what we're doing to the community, I think we need to think what those might be and look like. So this is the old document that we were working off of, which listed everything, and we were going through one by one. Below each of those was like a historic explanation of what was happening, just as a general information for the council. I believe we should shift away from this approach, and then I'm going to show you what we're heading into so that I think it's a better way to present information. And also what I did was I found a city that has won what's called the Malcolm Baldrige Award. That's like a highest national, it's the equivalent of like statewide, we have a Sterling Award. The Malcolm Baldrige Award is kind of the same as the Sterling Award, but it's national recognition. So I looked at one of those particular cities that are like the creme de la creme when it comes to municipal government to see how they did it. And they have a strategic planning approach, which I think from a even visual perspective just looks better. So let me just take you, I revised it to re-include our vision, the mission, and the values that the village had identified existed back when we first created the strategic plan in 2010. So we may have to kind of review this, and I'll prepare this for you. I apologize. There was no way for me to finish this project with the time frame we have. It's a lot, but I'll get it done. And as soon as I do, we can push it back out and look at the logistics of it and decide. But going just to the nitty gritty, what this does, they have this quick snapshot of each of the goal, the strategic objectives. And then you can see here where they have the community outcome metrics. So this particular city has that scoreboard dashboard approach to reporting what's happening from the strategic standpoint. And then based on what I think we should be monitoring and pushing information out, I just started kind of creating ideas of how we would, like, how do we basically prove that we're an excellent organization and financially stable? Like, how do we tell that story to a resident or to a business owner from a visual chart perspective, right? That would then be monitored over time, and we could potentially show and quantify those things. So for example, maintain healthy reserves and excellent bond ratings. So this strategic objective, when they drill down in this document, what they do is they take each one and then they define, what does that mean? Maintaining healthy reserves and an excellent bond rating. Well, how do you get there? So then it starts to tell like that story. Remember how Councilmember Hokumer was saying, like we're getting into the weeds and it's, a lot of this stuff is ongoing for us. But what they do is they define what maintaining healthy reserves and an excellent bond rating and how you would get there. So in our case, for example, we would maintain an unassigned fund balance in the general fund of 10% or more, right? Maintain additional unsigned fund balance for extraordinary expenditures in the amount of $3 million. We would maintain a AAA bond rating. We would confine long-term borrowing for capital improvement projects that can't be financed from current revenues. We would pay back bonds within a certain time frame. So some of these things we've already identified in our financial policies. So we're just restating that that's what it means to maintain a healthy reserve. That's how we would approach maintaining a healthy reserve and an excellent bond rating. And this is really for the reader, somebody who doesn't know this, to be able to come in and say, oh, okay, that's how they define it. That's what that means to the elected body. That's how you're gonna get here. So from a metrics standpoint, to communicate those issues that, for example, to residents, we could, from a dashboard perspective, we could provide a comparison of unassigned fund balance. So that cushion that goes beyond the 10. Go ahead. I saw.
My question then is then the strategy that everything simply becomes ongoing and eventually the document becomes 150 pages long with things that we already do and continue to do? At what point is there a trigger to remove any of these items from a strategic plan?
It depends on really how, like, some objectives merit being ongoing if the council feels that that is part of what defines Pinecrest. Like, because some of them you're gonna reach, some of them are like more project oriented approach things, but how do you, if maintaining healthy reserves is a strategic goal of the council long-term?
Maintaining healthy goals is a financial policy. It's not a strategic objective. Look, I don't, if this is how council decides to proceed, they're welcome to do so. My objections to the entire idea of creating a bottomless pit of patting ourselves on the back are well documented. So, from my perspective, a strategic plan that's actually being used and is useful should be about 3 pages long, period. It's an internal working document. It's not meant for voters. If we want to create a community report card, which is what this is, then that would be something we would put on our strategic plan to create. And then we would publish one every year.
Is that almost, Anna, is what you're saying? That's almost like what's that, an end of the year report that you would put out and kind of grade yourself on your accomplishments?
If we have the objective of creating a document that provides an annual report to our residents about how well we self-grade our performance based on the Pinecrest vision, mission, financial policies, and whatever other metrics we use to define ourselves as being a successful or not successful organization, That's fantastic. We should make that an objective of our strategic plan. And then create that and then make it part of our ongoing operations to produce that every year and share it with the community.
Do me a favor. Let me ask you a question. First off, let me ask a question, then I'll ask Anna a question. How much of this, Yossi, is something that this looks like it almost parallels our comp plan with goals, objectives, and policies and those types of things. Anna, if you could describe a strategic plan, what it would look like in your mind, what would it have in it? Just maybe just one topic of the 3 pages.
So from my perspective, a strategic plan is, I guess the simplest way to describe it is a to-do list. It's a to-do list of actions, items, reports, initiatives that we want to begin, advance, or complete within the next 1 to 5 years. Hypothetically, from my point of view, we have 6 areas that we define in our strategic plan. For an organization of our size, having anywhere from 3 to 5 strategic objectives under each one of those headings would probably be an appropriate workload for us and for our staff in 1, 3, 4 year objective pieces. We would have, as part of our monthly report from the manager, an update on each one of those at that point, 12 items, 15 items? Where are we? Did anything happen? Have we finished it? And then the strategic update that we would have at the beginning of each year would be to go through those less than 20 strategic objectives, cross off or put a check mark next to the stuff we did, evaluate whether or not we want to continue to work on the stuff we haven't finished or whether we've advanced appropriately on those items that might be multi-year items, and then create additional objectives on the to-do list that we need to focus on to continue to advance the organization. That to me is a functional, useful strategic plan.
Mr. Mayor,
Yossi, go ahead.
Using that approach, then, okay, right off the bat, anything, if you notice this little quick cheat sheet, anything that says ongoing is ongoing. That means it's already happening. You could easily just remove those things. And then you would get into things that would either be something that we need to do in the future or that is currently in progress and we can tweak and or abandon or add to on specific, like organizational, on the different categories. So, I mean, it's up to council how you guys want to proceed. If you feel comfortable, like I know, for example, maintaining healthy reserves and an exit, I know what that means. I know how that's defined. I know, we know that. We know what those things are already built into our financial policies. It's already built into the culture. That's why it's ongoing. So if somehow council felt it wasn't heading in that right direction, then that would be something to kind of, hurt us back. You know what I mean? Same thing, like maintaining a millage rate at the level necessary to provide high quality services, like duh, that's a given. But who defines high quality services? You guys. And so that's kind of like what does that really say? So I understand what she's saying completely. I totally agree in that sense, because it's not really moving the organization or the village in any particular way. They're just like blanket statements.
Yeah, they're blanket statements of things that at one point we might not have been doing. I don't know if 24 years ago we weren't maintaining a millage rate at a level necessary to provide high quality services and we had a terrible bond rating and unhealthy reserves. My investigation into our historical budgeting process shows that that is not the case. But yeah, anything that's ongoing, it gets a check mark next to it. You pat yourself on the back. And if you're creating an annual community report, then you create a report that says, we did these things. This is now incorporated into our own financial policies. This is part of our ongoing culture. We've done this for the next 25 years, and there's no reason to believe that we won't. And you communicate that to the community and to council. But, it's not.
Let me ask another question.
All I'll say is this. If anybody has actually gone back as a matter of work and looked at the strategic plan as it exists and used the strategic plan to inform its decision-making, right? It's a useful and meaningful strategic plan. Otherwise, it's just a document that we print and stick in a drawer. And if nobody can honestly say, I pulled out the strategic plan and used it to do my work in the last year, this is not a document that's okay as is.
Anna, let me ask you another question. So are the items on the strategic plan very broad, or are they very specific? So for exhibits, we want to contrast two things of something like have an excellent bond rating versus do a specific project like acquire a property.
They're generally more specific. So if you have identified an issue, your bond rating is a BB+, and you want to get your bond rating to at least a AA- for some reason, then you put that in your strategic plan. We want to move from here to there. And in order to do that, interestingly, we have to tighten up our reserves, make sure we're using our cash reserves for things that are appropriate based on that the bond rating agencies approve of, tweak our millage in such and such a way. That's a strategic objective. Having a financial policy, which is in our financial documents, right? And is available to anybody that says, we keep $3 million in the bank for a hurricane and we have an excellent bond rating and want to keep it that way, is just a general organizational statement. But if there's no actual work,
does anybody else have
produce? But
I want to give everybody else a chance. Does anybody else, Katie, Shannon, Doug, wherever you are?
I think Anna has great points. It goes back to what we talked about at our last meeting, is what is the point of this document and is it usable? And I agree with Anna. If it's something we create that either council or staff is just sticking in a drawer, not using it, then it's kind of like, well, what's the point of that? And it also, what Anna's proposing ties in, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor, with what you're suggesting with, we come up with these objectives and things that we want that are definable and could be stated in what Anna's proposing.
Thank you. Shannon, any thoughts?
Well, I guess to me, some of these strategic objectives serve as anchor points, right? And they give our village affirmation that we're on course and that we are working or maintaining or living up to our strategic plan. So I guess to me, some of them serve as anchor points. I guess that's my point. But it may, if it's too dense, it could dilute the strategic point as well.
I think that when you look at this second column, this is the real goal here for let's say just using organizational excellence and financial stability, because that's the first one. To maintain efficient and responsive government, which embraces the highest standard of service and citizen engagement and commits to the goals of the strategic plan. Okay, so what does that mean to have organizational excellence? How do you get us to be more excellent than when we are now? Is there something that we need to take action on from a financial stability perspective, right? That goes beyond what we're already doing now. We've achieved AAA bond rating. There is no higher rating. But for example, I could say for an organizational excellence standpoint, trying to get the Sterling Award, that to me starts taking us to a different level from a municipal government perspective, or the Malcolm Baldrige Award. That to me means we're aspirational and we're taking we're elevating the organization to bring it to a different higher level than what it is right now.
Let me follow up on that question. I get the sense that a lot of this kind of is duplicative or should be actually in the comp plan, right? Isn't that where you have an overriding financial goal with objectives and then very specific strategies?
But the comp plan doesn't have organizational excellence and financial category. Like that doesn't exist in a comp plan. Comp plan are elements, like, yeah, you have parks and open space and but you don't have like something that's more, like think, 1 to 5 year time frame of things that we need to kind of accomplish.
So what does a comp plan do?
The comp plan, it gives a overarching view of the community, and it obviously has more sophisticated details. You look at conservation, preservation, you're looking at infrastructure, what are the different elements? You could tell me better than I recall.
Right. But what I'm suggesting is that doesn't that go from the broad to the very specific and informed policies? And then what do we use our comp plan for? When is the last time we pulled our comp plan out and used it to direct anything on that this council has done?
We don't, when we look at the comp plan, and that's why we used to connect it to the different things, to things that were already in the comp plan, just to kind of give that connection to the comp plan. But the comp plan it's obviously comprehensive plan. It's on a shelf. This is what informs our budget process. This is what to us prioritizes what council really wants us to focus our energies on when it comes to 5-year budget.
So the comp
Mr. Chair,
but it's law. Yes, sir.
just with respect to the comp plan, I think it's important to consider its legal role in our overall planning decision-making process, which is that all of our planning decisions, all of our zoning, and all of the impacts of development have to be consistent with the comp plan in order for us to proceed with them and approve them. And I think that a strategic plan is it has much less legal significance. It has much more of an aspirational significance. It's a set of goals that you have for the overall, for all kinds of things that don't even relate to the comp plan, internal operations and marketing and things like that. Whereas the comp plan is principally focused on the growth of the built environment.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand that, and it makes a lot of sense. So what I think I'm hearing through this, and somebody chime in if I'm off base, is that this is, Anna, you almost think this is too broad and nothing well defined enough. We don't really know where we're going in here. So maybe instead of take a category like security and pedestrian safety, which I'm not quite sure how security and pedestrian safety are necessarily linked together. But if you had a pedestrian goal, maybe, or an infrastructure goal like that, something more specific, like a bicycle path on 67th Avenue, maybe a very specific goal that we want to get accomplished. And maybe that is our strategic plan objective, because that may take 3 to 5 years to get accomplished.
That, for example, is an excellent strategic objective. And because it's measurable, we can advance it in a systematic way. It's relatively short term, maybe not 1 fiscal year or 1 year. But for example, you can then use the strategic plan to piggyback and to make the organization better. If you look at 2.1, raise visibility for the police department through a proactive crime prevention campaign that improves increased education with the general public, blah, 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 blah. This one specifically talks about aiming to decrease burglaries and property loss. Now, over the last couple of years, with the communications department, with Deputy Chief Cohn, with working with our patrol officers, I think we can all agree we have raised the police department's profile. We've created a whole bunch of materials that we share in person. We now have created this thing where we'll go do security checks at people's houses. We have social media presence of the Pinecrest Police Department. We have the Safer Watch app. We've expanded the community, the crime watches in the neighborhoods. We've done all of these actionable items related to 2.1, right? So if we leave this as it is, all it says is ongoing. But the way you actually make this a working document is, and one of the suggestions I had to add to the strategic plan is, okay, put a line through 2.1, because we did that. Let's take it a step further. Let's create an objective where the police department now begins to actively engage with the online community that reports and discusses crime in the community, like the ring.com network, like Nextdoor, like some of these other online and social media communities, because one of the trends that we're seeing in reviewing communications is that people are reporting petty crime, and particularly property crime, onto those websites, but never actually reporting them to the police department. And so we can probably conclude that some of our crime statistics aren't actually reflecting some of the property crime and some of the property crime trends that are happening in the community. So you piggyback on 2.1, say we did that, we created all of these tools for the police department. Now let's raise it another level and say, we're now going to use all of these tools to engage with all of these new, right, social media and online citizen communities in order to monitor the amount of, use them, add them to monitor the amount of crime in the community, create a social media and community communication plan to encourage people to actually report experiences of crime to the police department and not just on social media, and something else, right? And we work for the next year or two to make that happen and to use all these new tools we have. And then we can say, did we do this? Is this now part of how we operate? Is it becoming part of the standard operating procedure of the police department? Yes, check, right? We did it. So now let's make it better and focus it somewhere else, rather than just having it being ongoing.
Well, I mean, but we want it to be ongoing because we never want to stop doing that. You're just saying we need to advance it to another level. Yes, go ahead.
So I'm going to just shift real quick, just show you something. So this is like the snapshot, but when you get into just the opening paragraph of this section on organizational and financial stability, those ongoing overarching kind of concepts can be built into this narrative here. That's just like a little bit of a, oh, by the way, we do all this. But then when you get into, you know, the actual goals, you can drill down like what Anna was suggesting, Councilmember Holcomer was suggesting. So I think we don't necessarily have to lose that, you know, the fact that these things are still important to us. But if you guys want to kind of still have that built into the overarching sentiment of how the organization should be run, it could easily be built in a narrative for each section. But then you get into the meat of it, which is, you know,
right,
those
so
aspirational goals that
so I think once something becomes ongoing, it moves out of the strategic plan action list into whatever sort of narrative framework you want to give it.
Right.
And then the strategic plan just continues to be constantly updated with how we're going to push that forward. And hypothetically, in an ideal scenario, each one of those items is eventually going to be folded into the narrative, right? Of this is how we operate, and these are our values, and this is how we do things.
Right.
Because ideally, you should be able to print off the first 3 pages of this as a working body, right? And go through that, check, check, check. Have we done it? Do we have to do it? Where are we, right? And if you want to then not print off the rest of the document until it gets to the end of the year and Joe has to do his State of the Village address, that's perfectly reasonable, right? But again, what I want to create is this sense of the document is something that's a useful tool for us. And if we have a question about, should we do this, should we not do this, is this the right decision or not, we should feel that we can look back on that strategic plan and read what we set out for ourselves to do that year. Did we say we were going to advance this or not?
So with that said, let me just say, hold on, let me just make a, okay. So with that said, I would suggest that we just, let's tackle each category, look at the list, take out what's ongoing that, I'll work that into the narrative of the bigger document, and then focus on future or in progress and anything new that you guys feel should be done to further the strategic outcome of making us an excellent organization and be more financial stable than what we are currently. And that way it's aspirational. And always thinking a time frame of 1 to 5 years, no more than 5 years. Whatever we do here shouldn't be more than 5 years. Is that okay with everyone?
I think so.
Okay, so we would take out maintain healthy reserves, maintain millage rate, and maintain communication strategy that aligns with Village Council strategic priorities. Those are already happening. So that would be taken out. We have an aspirational or a reminder to review extraordinary expenditure mitigation set aside of 3 million by a time specific, just to make sure that we're in line with inflation. We're asking ourselves to review the financial policies every 3 years, just to make sure that they don't need any kind of adjusting. We're asking to continue to update web-based communications efforts to include fully ADA compliant capabilities.
Can we put a timeline on that?
Yeah,
I mean, is it reasonable to expect that to be done by the end of the year?
I don't think so. The amount of work that would entail making all our documents, but Guido can better answer that.
What's a reasonable timeline, Guido, to get that done?
Hold on. Your screen is on mute.
She asked what's a reason. Did you hear that last one?
Yeah, he heard it. He's just trying to figure out what.
So it's a very, very lengthy process, council member, and we've basically done a cost benefit analysis and are working our way back. There are certain things on the website, there are certain documents on the website that we pulled down that have little value, historical documents, resolutions from 1997, which honestly, no one ever pulls from our website. And so we've sort of put that on the back burner, and we're working our way back while at the same time remediating current documents, new documents that go on the website on a continued basis. So in terms of a time, it's an ongoing project. It honestly could take years. And like I said, we've done the analysis that we may never get there. We may decide that there are just certain things that had been on the website that have little value to most users, and we just may never get to those things.
I pushed for it to be done because to me, it was very sad that we had that capability to have that historical view, because we started from the get-go in an age that allowed us to have all these things, and then we've lost that capability. But I don't know how important it is for the elected officials to keep that capability or not. Guido and I have opposite views on this issue. I find value in that, in being able to look at the historic, what has happened historically, and being able to mine our stuff. We've always positioned ourselves as, very transparent and open government. So to me, removing that ability kind of worked against that, that culture that we've always had. So
and it's not that we differ. It's a logistics issue.
Right.
So is there value to the remediation clerk spending weeks remediating the 1997 budget document? Probably not. No one realistically is ever really going to want to pull up the 1990. When I say no one, I'm talking about the general public. No one's going to want to pull up that kind of document. And so again, it's balancing current demands for keeping current important documents that do need to go on the website because they're timely, and then doing that backlog, agenda packets. It would literally take years to do agenda packets. Is there a value of remediating an agenda packet from 1999? No. Those documents, of course, are on record in my office, and anybody could get them if they ever needed them.
Right.
But do we need to publish them on the website? Probably not.
So
But
that
as the
is
manager
to be-
said, it's up to
But
the
then
council.
I think then the
This is
to-do list
ongoing.
for the strategic objective is to create a, I guess for lack of a better word, a triage system to document a triage system for where we're going to start, what we think is highest priority for this remediation specialist to work on, and create a timeline for each tranche of the triage so that we can measure how quickly we're advancing, and periodically understand whether we're reaching our objective there or not. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we're just going to have this person kind of toiling in a Dickensian fashion in a cubicle somewhere forever, maybe. So
And
that's
that
structure.
and council member, that is as great a description of the work involved as I've heard so far. And that's exactly it. And it is just incredibly timely. And we've done that. What you just said, we've done that. He does, I determined the priority. For instance, this week we've done a lot of documents that are timely for the building department. That's been his focus this week. When there's a lull and that kind of stuff, then he goes back and picks up where he left off on, let's say, resolutions. I think we're back to, 2012, 2011 on resolution. And so he always goes back when there's a lull in anything that's current that needs to be done. But to give you an idea, the 2020 budget, the most recent budget you just adopted, it took almost 3 weeks to remediate that one document. And so it is just an unbelievably time-consuming process. So I set priorities and I set benchmarks for him. But, if someone throws out, the Pinecrest Sun will publish in a few weeks. That document takes time because of the pictures, because of the graphs, because of the information. So he's working as expeditiously as possible. And again, remember, this is only to get that stuff back up on the website to meet the ADA requirements. And it's,
and at some point, the clerk's office, as part of developing that remediation plan, should say, obviously things that are current need to be uploaded in an ADA compliant fashion. And so they're going to take precedence over any of the historical work. This is how we triage out and decide what's the priority for the backlog of 25 years of documents. And, at some point you should, create a report for us and explain to us in terms of time, in terms of money, what it costs to completely remediate every single document that the clerk's office has back to the first resolutions in 1995, so that we can make a decision as a council on the policy. Are we going to really, put it all online back to the original documents? Are we going to do it back to 2000? At what point are we going to cut it off and no longer carry this expense? Or are we really going to do the full historical work and be prepared to budget for that for the next 15 years? Right? So
yes. And the last thing in terms of that cost analysis. So the reason the manager proposed to you a few years ago to create this position was exactly that, the cost. So to give you an idea, to outsource it, which is a practical way to do this, obviously, but but likewise, not only is it time consuming, it's incredibly costly. To give you an idea, to outsource last year's budget, or the budget before that, whatever we had sent to be remediated before we did the in-house position, was almost $4,000 for that one document.
Right.
And so that is an option to outsource this work, but the manager reached the understanding that it was far more cost effective to do it in-house than to outsource it. But likewise, if it was a council priority that all of this be done in the next year or 2 or 3, whatever it is, that's an option, is to outsource a lot of it. It's just money.
Well, I would say, so if you can create the remediation plan, put some triage on it, timeline it out, let us understand the costs and time involved, man hours involved with doing a complete historical update of all of our data. At that point, then we, from a policy and budget perspective, can either decide this is how far back we're willing to go. The rest of it is paper and you can get it through the clerk. Or, maybe we hire another guy. This is a strategic priority for us to do all of our documents. And therefore we need to hire another person and factor them into the budget for the next 5 years so that they can do everything back to the Stone Age. I don't know, but we've never discussed it. So let's put that on there as a to-do for this year. And then by the end of this year, we should have at least reached a decision.
So develop an ADA remediation plan for the website that analyzes what aspects should be updated with time expectations, including anticipated man hours to complete.
Mm-hmm.
And you want that by
the end of the calendar year, certainly, because then if we decide to go whole hog and we need more people, then we need to budget that in the following, budget cycle.
So Councilmember Hockamer, so I understand what you want is for each of the strategic objectives to be more more defined, more specific, more measurable tasks that are time bound.
Exactly.
Like, let's develop a red line. By December, we can remediate all the way back to X year.
Exactly. Exactly.
It'll be a report that that we would produce for council that basically gives you an analysis of what this actually means. How long will it take? What will be done? What can be accomplished with the resources we currently have? And if resources were to be augmented, what would we be able to do, and the timelines for that, so that you all could have a policy discussion on whether or not you want to go any further than what we're doing currently. So,
right.
All right, Mayor, is everybody okay with that? And then I can cross out this continue to update web-based communications effort.
Mm-hmm.
I am.
Yeah.
Okay. So develop a plan for an organization dashboard to improve transparency and efficiency and better inform the policy-making process. That dashboard that we're talking about can be used for one of two things: to inform internally what's happening, as well as communicate outwardly to the community. So, as far as creating a dashboard, we obviously have, the metrics that we monitor that we're reporting to council in the reports every month. So we may want to review those monthly report metrics for what's happening internally in the organization to make sure council is still okay with what we're monitoring, and that information is useful to you as decision makers. But then I think separate to that, we could look at the dashboard, the village dashboard that is aside from being an internal outcome measure tool, that it's also a communications tool for the community, and what that might look like. So those are kind of two different things, just suggestions. So I would suggest that develop a plan. We're working on a dashboard. One is for community and the other one is internal. So I think you can make an aspirational objective that talks about reviewing existing departmental metrics and how they're communicated to council to ensure that those, that data that's being provided to you is useful to you for, that monthly data. So that can be one goal that we work on. And then the other one can be developing that community dashboard, which is kind of like what I was trying to work on here. that might be useful to give to the community. Thoughts?
Yes, I think we need to look at the stuff that's in our own monthly report, because some of that stuff is weird. And some of the council members who specifically wanted some of those pieces aren't on anymore, and things like that. And number two, I think we need to, somewhere in the right section of the strategic plan, inform the community side of the dashboard by deciding how we are going to consult with residents to determine what kind of information they would want to get from a community dashboard. So what do they deem informative and appropriate from that sort of dashboard?
Okay, so I have review monthly departmental reports and assess what data points should continue to be reported to the village council as one.
What should be reported to village council. Maybe we'll come up with something new to torture staff with.
Okay. And then the other one is develop a plan for organization dashboard to improve transparency and efficiency and better inform the policy-making process. This is still ongoing. I would argue that this plan, though, really ties to what the outcome metrics are for the community dashboard. So, and I think that is appropriate to be discussed during these workshops. For each of these categories, we can.
And are these each 1 year objectives? Do you see them being something we can complete in the next calendar year? Or should we do it by 2022? Or what's our timeline for these?
Maybe under status, instead of saying future in progress, we put a by date, you know, I mean, obviously that's going to fluctuate, but maybe we put 1.5 by such and such a time.
Yeah.
We can put like attach dates here to the status.
Yeah,
like a goal date, like basically completion deliverable dates, so that we know that we're moving it in that. So for now, just so that I don't lose my place, I'm gonna just add a time frame here, and then
we can move it over to
move
the
it
status.
afterward, right? So I know.
Great suggestion,
right?
Councilmember Del Prado.
Hold on, let me just. I'm just gonna remind myself what we're doing. Develop a plan for organization dashboard to improve transparency and efficiency and better inform policymaking process. The intent was this year anyway for this, because this has already been on the on the plan for a couple of years. So I'm we're already looking at this. I think we can definitely deliver by the 21st, by this year, end of this year. Okay. Strive to decrease the financial gap in Parks and Recreation Department as well as Pinecrest Gardens. So the interesting thing about this goal, what I would suggest is actually say, like, decrease it by what? Because we can always decrease it. The question is how much do you want to decrease? So I can tell you, and Rob's listening in, so we can ask him to join the call so that we can kind of talk about this a little bit. But I was doing some research, and I had forwarded it to Rob when it comes to what they call is the shifting of Parks and Recreation programming to user-based fees, and what nationally you consider, you know, there's obviously, it's a trend that's been happening over the last 15 years. It's a shift from the traditional Parks and Recreation government function, which was normally just tax-based subsidies of these operations. It's shifted. It started in the national trend, started really with the federal parks systems, where they started to shift some of the financial burdens because it was getting expensive to user-based program or fees. And then all the other, state and local organizations shifted to that type of approach. So we have like a hybrid approach. I can tell you, and if Rob's in the call, he can tell you a little bit about the national trends and what we see, what's on average, that monetary breakdown. And if we want to surpass that average as a goal, what that number would be. Guido, can you let Rob into the call, please? Hopefully he's listening and can inform that.
I'm listening to him. I'm just making more coffee. I'll be right back.
Okay. Is he on the call or is he? Did we lose Councilmember Kraft?
The only question is when did it happen? I don't see him.
He's not on the call. There he is. Or that's Rob.
I don't see him.
Yeah, I don't see him. We lost him at some point.
We lost him in 2018.
Okay, Rob, you're on mute.
All right. Good morning, Council, Mayor. Village manager is correct. The trends really have been going towards a more of a hybrid mix of user fees and fee-based programming, as well as still the community service method of just the things that we would normally provide our parks, making them available for the community. I think on the last strategic meeting we had, we just put out the national average for recouping non-tax-based fees is about 25% on average. In the South, it's actually lower than that. It's about 20%, with the upper quartile of agencies getting about 40 to nationally 44% of their operating expenses, and that's extensive. I mean, that's a lot of operating expense to come out of the revenue base. But I think that if we could stay in that upper quartile, my suggestion would be to make that a goal, is to say having our costs to at least match the that 25%, that we could do that. The people are going to pay for high quality programs, and right now, because there's so many other providers out there providing services of all different kinds, people don't mind paying for these things the same way that they were that they didn't want to pay for them 20, 30 years ago. There's still a debate within the Parks and Rec realm of whether these fees or whether these services should be free to communities or not. And every single time it comes down to numbers, it comes down to the budget, and it comes down to, especially back in 2008, 2009, when the economy was just horrible. People, parks and recreation agencies were being cut severely and still trying to figure out a way to survive and to offer these services to the community. And that's a big place where the pay to play structure is really sprouted from.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just interject, also so the social economic makeup of communities also drives the decisions on whether or not how much user fee based you want your park systems to be. So because one of the I guess cons of doing a real heavy user fee based program is the impact on the lower income community. We obviously in Pinecrest are blessed in that case, but we're part of a greater community and region that so how we balance that, because obviously our parks are not solely used by village residents, they're open to the general public. So those are the gives and takes when we set whatever levels you guys might want to look at. Now, Rob has done a little bit of homework that could be shared with you if you care to see where we look what things look like right now from a financial perspective, to kind of inform your decisions on what kind of goals you would like to set. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and Rob, if you can pull that up so that they could take a look. This was something that Councilmember Hokumer had asked us to prepare for discussion, and so we can share that stuff with council to kind of help with.
Yes. it's gonna take me a second. I apologize to pull that part back up.
Okay.
It's still on my, you know, can I actually, I'm gonna email it to you.
Yeah, email it to me.
Okay. Don't mind. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, it's okay. If you send it to me, that way I have the latest one that you were working on.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more
Information.
as
So you
well.
just tell me what to.
Yeah. And you're gonna, I just sent it. When you get to it, the fourth tab over is data and charts.
Okay.
That's the one. The other ones are just huge numbers that you can look through, but it'd be a little bit more difficult to for anyone to see anything on the screen for that.
Okay. I'm just waiting on that.
Okay. But the trends, basically what we're looking at from a trend standpoint is really to see where the Parks and Recreation Department has been from a total budget standpoint of for the village. And it's been consistent. We originally took the goal of looking the last 10 years. And then through conversation with Councilmember Hokemer, we realized that we should just go all the way back to the beginning of time. And so that's what we did, was when we went back to 1996 budgets and you know, did the exercise through, and we can see where the parks were going and you know, how their growth or not, you know, each year with revenue and expenses. And it's been pretty consistent over the last 10 years of being in the 10 to 11% range of the entire village budget. The community center, when it came on board, first budget started back in 2006 and 7, and it's been consistently, you know, on average in the 12% range, 13% range for most of those time periods as well.
Did you already send it?
I did.
It's still stuck in cyber world. While I wait for that, I just wanted to mention, so the exercise that we're going to show you frames two different things. One, the question was, as a percentage of the overall general budget, what does that department, the Parks and Recreation Department, look like? And then we also split out the community center, which is another, here it goes. I just got it.
Okay.
The other question is, just as a, here you go. Let me see. So you want me to look at data and charts?
Data and charts has, yeah.
So I'm gonna pull it up, and then I just need you to walk me through what you want to show them, and then I'll, okay, hold on. Let
Okay.
me move this. So we're looking at, just, let me see.
So
go ahead.
all right, so the very top, if you scroll all the way up to the top, you're looking at each year, the parks and the obviously the expenditures for the PCC are not in there yet, and then the total percent of the budget that we have and divided by parks, PC, from what we expended. This does not include capital projects. This is just general operating and personnel.
So that you're looking, when you say the charts, you're looking at just the Excel spreadsheet of the numbers, or are you looking at the visual chart, this here?
The visual chart represents all of those numbers that are in there. So the yellow represents the total budget for the village, and then blue being the parks expenses, orange being PCC, and then the gray, the total of both. And what the determination was to really see if there's a trend line coming in and where we are from Parks and Recreation, and if there are anomalies to go back into, and this is where the process that we're doing now is, you'll see if you go into park personnel and operating figures, and you can, so this now shows every single line item that we have. And so we're looking to dig deeper into each line and see if there's an anomaly. What caused that anomaly? Is it something, as we were discussing, something that we added into that budget that year that doesn't necessarily need to stay every single time? Or if it's something, you know, this was going to be a one-time fee, you know, we would not have to, you know, we wouldn't concern ourselves with it for if it was a personnel service that we were just using for 1 year. And
Okay,
so we're really just
let me
looking
just
at where we
explain,
can-
if I could just kind of drill down a little bit. So what these charts do is take historical data even from line item, like what is it that we're spending from an operational perspective? You know, it divides personnel costs versus then the recurring, this is personnel here. So this is
Yeah.
what we've traditionally spent, because you know our budget's broken down by category. You have personnel, then you have operating expenditures and capital outlay. We took out capital outlay because those are typically non-recurring, and then we split up the personnel versus the operating costs to see and identify outliers and why things may be happening a certain way. So typically from a personnel standpoint, things that would impact personnel and make maybe outliers where it spikes costs from a personnel perspective could potentially be, for example, insurance costs, which we have zero control over, but health insurance costs can go up, you know, 15% in a given year, and it would have not been something that we may have been able to foretell. Or the addition of a new position that will also create, you know, a shift where something will see a huge increase. So when we try to give the information, and this is just data dump right now, so I don't want to kind of get too much in the weeds, but when we looked at this analysis, I think the purpose of doing this analysis is from an operational standpoint for us to look at, you know, are there any efficiencies that we might be losing? Those were the concerns, you know, that were voiced. Are we missing something? Like, why are things costing more or not? But when you look at, for example, just operating expenditures, let me just put this out here so that you could see. So you could see that over the years where our operating expenditures for parks and recreation, where they've been over the course of the years, and how obviously they go up and up and up because costs just go up. The question is, number one, what percentage is that of the overall budget? And is there any reasons or opportunities for savings when you deduct what we're spending for program instructors, which is a pass-through, because we're basically charging a user fee and then we get it back. When you deduct for that, you start seeing, and you deduct any non-recurring expenditures that were also identified, you start seeing where we stand from a budget perspective. So we're actually, if you notice, we had a higher budget, 953, which I would assume is probably 4 years ago. Yeah. And it's going in the right direction because the operating expenditures are decreasing. The recurring operating expenditures are decreasing. There will be a point though that it kind of stays stable. Like what you want to see when it comes to operating expenditures is you should really only be seeing cost of inflation impacting that, and or any new programs that you're introducing. Other than that, it should be really stable, the operating expenditures. On the personnel side of things, when you get into the personnel analysis, then you need to just, you know, understand what's happening, what drives increases to personnel costs. Okay. And then if there's any outliers or things that we could potentially control to, you know, if council wanted to bring down costs, then those would be the areas that we would have to bring down costs, right? So the only way to cut costs in personnel is if you cut positions, basically, and if you, you know, make changes to insurance, you know, benefits, which is kind of what we were doing. Was making adjustments to our insurance benefit costs to kind of drive down costs. So we went from, you know, we used to have 100% coverage with no deductibles, like really good insurance, like that's not what we provide anymore. And we've had to make those adjustments just to keep costs under control and as flat as we can get them. Okay, so going back to that overarching goal though, when it goes to specifically the question that we were talking about was user fee revenues to offset the cost of doing business. Rob mentioned on average nationally, and in the South, that average is what, 25%?
Nationally, it's about 25%. In the South, it's about 20%.
And what have we been trending in the last year or two?
The last year we were at 49%. As of this year, we were just about 45% last year with COVID, which was phenomenal. And then when we had the year before that, we were at 72%, which is absolutely unheard of. For that was obviously pre-COVID, but we know we can do it. So I assume we can do it again sometime.
Right. But aspirationally, I think, it's aspirational, but if we can get, not counting for COVID and a pandemic and the effort and the impacts that might have to this goal, but if we wanted to try to get us to a gap that actually flips it to say an 80% goal, to that would be aspirational, because we know we've gotten as high as 72%.
Yes, it would be aspirational. We'll have to build our programs back up. You're making my heart go a little bit.
Don't worry about, we know we're going to build up programming. Yeah. This is post-pandemic. This is kind of like thinking 1 to 5 years. So we can get ourselves to something like that.
I have to realistically, so that everyone understands my point of view on the whole subject. It is, since I've been involved in Parks and Recreation, there's been this whole debate of business or not business. I see Parks and Recreation as a business for the community as well. Most businesses don't want to run in a deficit. So my goal, knowing that this is still community service, is to get it as close as possible to running at the break-even mark. And so if it means that we can get an 80% goal, I'm in for trying. I think that we can. I think that the services we provide are high quality, and people will gladly join us. And we'll still have free events. We'll still have free programs. People can still come to the park. We're not charging for parking or things like that. But we run enough programming, high quality program, to offset some of these other expenses and community services that are free.
And your goal's not to, our goal's not to turn a profit on this stuff, right? It's to defer
No, to make everything neutral.
So
ultimately, we just want to take the burden off the taxpayers if we can and provide this community service.
I wanted to mention, Mayor, there are parks that are profitable. Okay, so we do have parks currently, or
currently,
that are profitable.
Park
Clearpoint Park is profitable. It pays for itself and makes additional money. That additional money, because you're lumping all parks together, subsidizes the costs of other.
Right. And we have Veterans Wayside Park and Red Road that are not money makers. They're not meant to be money makers or running programs at all. So those surpluses from one park is going to, pay for the maintenance and care of the other park.
Right. The passive parks don't generate. So the things that do generate, we're going to try to maximize that potential through, party rental kind of revenues, and then program revenues.
Yeah.
Those are really the two things. The leagues are like another controversial issue, because right now we just charge like a flat fee of 15% fee per user. That's how we make money on the leagues. And we've seen a trend that is going away from that to more like just field rental. Right, revenues, and like a flat fee field rental thing. But that would be completely abandoning our historical approach to leagues in the village. And I think that that might warrant a little more in-depth review before we were to recommend some kind of to that approach.
I would make the point as well to anybody who's concerned that this sort of neoliberal strategy when it comes to parks and recreation, I want to clarify, at this point in this analysis, we have pulled off all of the capital expenditures here, right?
Right.
So we are heavily subsidizing parks and recreation because we purchase these facilities, build the facilities, maintain the facilities, all of that capital overhead that any private business would be paying for, we're paying for, right? So we're using business terminology to talk about a community service that we provide and that we subsidize. So we're only talking about wiggling with the revenue side of it, benchmarking it a bit to what the community is willing to pay in the open market, and then providing them in these subsidized community-owned spaces. Just to, put it in a box, because I don't want anyone to feel like Pinecrest is trying to turn Parks and Recreation into a for-profit business, which is they're then competing with, private industry or competing with small business. That's not what's happening here.
Right.
So number one, yes, I think it's great if we want to put an 80%, if in the next 5 years we can get to that 80% as an objective and see how close, Rob can get it and how close we can do it. I think that's a fantastic objective. Understanding again that one of the reasons why we do that is so that we can continue to offer free programming to senior citizens, and we can offer free events at our communities with our schools and different things, and be good community partners. I think that's a fantastic revenue side objective. On the flip side, the exercise you just went through, where you're really kind of doing an autopsy of your expense side, I think is really, really a fantastic exercise for Parks and Recreation, but for all of our departments to go through that. One of the reasons why, when I talked with Yossi and Rob one-on-one about this situation, was I said, we perhaps as a village and from our budgeting side want to take advantage of the good times that we're in. The fact that we as a village are not in a crisis. We're not frantically looking to save money and keep our heads above water. We have been financially stable, in the 10 years since we started the recovery from the meltdown. And so this is exactly the right time to go back department by department, engage in the kind of analysis that Rob just did, really down and dirty, nitty gritty. Look at places where we've been incredibly successful. For example, Rob shared with me that over the past 10 years, the utility costs in the Parks and Recreation Department have basically been flat. They haven't increased at all because of investments in LED technology and just more efficient usage of water and electricity. So that's a great thing. We should be shining it from the rooftops. That sort of exercise as something that we would hope that each one of the departments would do over the next, 24 months or something like that, might be something to put in the strategic plan, and then ask Yossi to do a quarterly report for us where they've gone through each department, done that analysis, looked for those trends that are above what you would expect to see because of inflation, looked for opportunities where there might be savings, and then number one, allow us to boast about the things that we're doing well. And number two, find those tiny areas where small efficiencies could be found, because we run such a tight budget that as we just did in the last council meeting, we refinanced a bond because we were going to save $9,000 a year. Yay for us, we saved $9,000 a year. But in our $25 million budget, I would be surprised if over all of our departments, we couldn't find another $9,000 a year, right? If we really dug down into it and looked for opportunities to save. So, I would suggest, number one, yes, let's look at the revenue side for Parks and Recreations, but do what Rob has just done for each one of our departments and report back to council with what we see about how the expense side has been growing. Because, as I pointed out to Yossi, there are many things outside of our control. So this isn't a reflection of bad management, but our budget has increased almost 37% over the last 10 years in a place where inflation has been about 13%.
Actually, the inflation in this region was at 20%.
Higher. It's closer to 15 to 20. You're right. It's
right.
higher
It's to the region.
Right. But we're definitely tracking above. So the question is why? The only answer I want is why. I'm not putting a value judgment on it. I'm not saying we need to change anything. We're very financially healthy. The only answer I'm looking for by asking the question is why.
Right.
Tell me why.
Is that basically what we just simply need to ask why and have staff come back with an explanation as to why? I gotta think that the organization is of the size that Yossi kind of knows the answers to these questions almost intuitively or off the top of her head and so does staff. I mean, in every department, and they can, given being asked the question, they can come back and give us an answer in short order.
Right. So as a strategic objective, I think in terms of informing our budget process over the next couple of years, we should be asking staff to come back with that sort of analysis of the department by department, right? Down looking for trends particularly in the expenses, not just in the revenues, and giving us a report on what the financial trends have been department by department. And if they find an opportunity for some savings, good for them.
Mr. Chair, yes, I just wanted to advise the council that I'm going to be growing some facial hair in the next 15 minutes. Actually, I'm going, Roger's going to step in for me at noon, if you don't mind.
I was going to say mazel tov.
No, it's impossible with me. No matter what I do, I can't, I don't have that.
So,
gene.
let me just kind of double back. So creating a goal that is aspirational for the Parks and Recreation Department of 80% revenue to expenditure ratio is an informed goal because we've been able to analyze the metrics in that department in anticipation of this. I wouldn't feel comfortable setting the same type of goals for Pinecrest Gardens until we went through a similar exercise and looked
how about we make that the to-do for this year? Go through that exercise for the gardens.
For the gardens is to do a more, so if we were to do that, I would say strive to decrease the financial gap in the Parks and Recreation Department to an 80% revenue to expenditure ratio. That would be one goal. And then for Pinecrest Gardens, we can develop a in-depth
Strategy?
financial analysis of both revenues and expenditures by category and operational line item to assess trends with the ultimate, hold on, I'm just throwing ultimate goal of developing a like a long-term short-term rather, well, long-term financial plan for recovering costs.
For cost recovery.
For cost recovery, thank you. Cost recovery. So that way we can look at what's happened to date and what are the things that we would be doing moving forward to kind of try to move the scale in the opposite direction.
I think that for 1.6 and 1.7, for 1.6, we should quantify that 80% revenue to expenditure ratio for the calendar year of 2021 or by such and such a date. So it's something measurable, right?
Right. We want to put a timeline on that. So
I would like us to have a 5-year window to accomplish this because we have the pandemic and the unknown of how that's going to play out. If we get it sooner, then fine.
But so Rob knows, what the measure.
Yeah. So it's 2026.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you know the 80% is a good number?
Well, we know that right before COVID, we were already achieving 72%. cost recovery.
Which when you benchmark it, I'm nosy enough that I looked at other cities. When you benchmark it is actually in the really, really excellent category.
It's fantastic.
So
Yeah.
we're going from really, really excellent to
20% or
top of the
25%.
line. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point do you start to take quality of life issues and monetize them unnecessarily, right? I mean, aren't some of these things government issues that government should be absorbing on its own? And Tom, does that make sense?
Well, then you can get into the whole, that was that discussion I was saying, how, like, how many, like, is there a percentage of free programs or things that would be still available at no cost? And, you know, like, do we want, you know, in the case of Parks and Recreation, you know, just anecdotally, I know that our costs go up when we add a new community festival or a new community event, that those things we don't charge money for.
Guys, I got to step away for a second. I'll be right back.
And so, you know, I think at some point, once you reach this goal, we have to kind of take a self-assessment, and we have to every year look at this goal and say, as we're moving towards that, reaching that 80%, are we getting any negative feedback by looking at that communications loop on just in the general sense, what the residents think about how we provide that service? I think we do have to make sure that there's a good balance and that we don't inadvertently shift too much in another direction that then creates negative sentiment about the
We
village.
want to maybe be a little more cautious and do 75%, which is above the 72, but you know, see how that goes and then reevaluate.
I would recommend we go big, go strong, and then we can reassess every year. Like at the end of the, like, this can be changed every single year we want it to.
Mhm.
And
It should be fluid, right? Because Rob, if you feel like it's negatively impacting the programs that you're able to afford residents, then we should come back and.
he's gonna have to report, right? on how
Yeah,
this-
even in the middle of the year, if we're noticing that we're getting that sentiment, we don't have to continue moving forward with this. We can always come back and say, look, this is the information we're receiving, and I think we need to make an adjustment.
Yeah, and even when we were first started, when Rob first came on board and we had the community center sort of in our sites, the community center had a sort of a 200 and change gap in between its revenue and its expense over time. And so one of the things we talked to Rob about was that ideally a community center pays for itself. It's not a moneymaker, right? It's paying for itself. But one of the reasons that it pays for itself is that when you create the triangle of services, you generate income from high demand services that benchmark is very expensive out in the community, like ballet classes. But you generate enough from those programs to be able to support community programming, which would never be able to be cost effective in any other scenario, like our senior programming, for example,
Right.
chair aerobics and free blood pressure taking. Some communities do this, particularly in places where they don't have a lot of preschools and early education.
We lost her.
Mhm.
Not good enough.
Let me text her. I don't know.
Yeah.
All I have to say is this year's zombie run is going to pay for it all.
Oh,
I
I
have-
can
Oh, Katie.
back up. It was, yeah, we're thinking about doing it at Greer, just FYI.
Oh,
Mhm,
I'm
starting
gonna
it.
take a 30-second break. I'll be right back.
Okay.
how would that work out?
The Rock and Run has put out a 5K course, and we were thinking about actually making it a 5K. So we can follow that same course that they used and use Evelyn Greer Park, and then have a big event at Evelyn Greer Park, which will be a little bit more conducive with parking and people walking up as well.
Monitor for Anna. She's gonna dial back in.
So a
That's-
5K in the park, like loops, or is that, you mean that's like?
No, not in the park, leaving the park. So there's
Okay. Okay.
yeah, leaving the park, going through the community still.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
all in discussion. It's nothing's solidified yet, because obviously we don't have the budget set until later, but also wherever we are with the pandemic.
Well, our first year it was so successful.
Oh my gosh.
The last one was obviously very well attended too, but very
It was very, very well attended. Yes. So, and to Councilmember Hokumer's statements, this is a revenue, ultimately it is revenue neutral. So we would like to build the revenue up in order to offer both the paid and free programming. So it's not, we're not trying to get rid of free programming or anything like that. But we've got a lot of gaps of time that we can fill with paid programming that will help us to offset some of those other free programs. And quite frankly, will possibly help us to offer even more free programmings because of the revenue that's produced as well. So we're trying to keep a good balance for the community.
Right. Sorry, this is Pinecrest, so my Wi-Fi just went out. I'm now piggybacked off my cell phone, so if AT&T goes, sorry.
Okay, so develop an in-depth financial analysis of revenues and expenditures by category of future. And then the last one in this category was develop a short-term and long-term plan for the use of transportation fund monies, accounting for first and last mile services and the realignment of Miami-Dade County's bus system. So to remind council, this one was, I know this one's this. So if you recall, we had a pilot program with the freebie, and we had the pilot, you know, the system with our transit bus people mover, and we have a finite amount of money that comes in for transportation funds. Okay, so the question was, and the reason this went in here was there had been discussions at the county that we should look to fill the gap of that last mile for transit to and from home, and look at the long-term, how we would use transportation monies to still achieve that while still doing the other things that we have to do. Because we also tap into transportation money for like road resurfacing and stuff like that. So, and we have zero control, because obviously what informs that, you know, the revenue sources for this are, you know, local option gas tax and stuff like that. So I think we had anticipated that short term, we were going to review the pilot program we have with freebie to see if that would be, because that we were using like that first and last mile. And we were doing that with a grant that was provided to the village. And we're like in the middle of that. We stopped everything because of COVID. So that kind of threw a monkey wrench in the whole thing that we were trying to do, because we were never able to really build up the ridership for that last mile approach that we were exploring with the freebies because of the pandemic came. So it was popular, but when you did the financial analysis of that program, it was still coming out like way too expensive. Like it could be cheaper to just get an Uber from one of those stations and get it to your house than it would be to shop around and wait for a freebie to come in.
But isn't that kind of that's not a good or a bad result from the study? It's just the result, which I think that the whole freebie experiment was trying to figure that out. Is something like freebie a viable option? And at this point in time, the answer would be no, right?
Right now, the answer is no. We committed, the council committed to regrouping after the pandemic with the whatever was left over in that grant to kind of try to ramp it up again. I just don't know what ridership is going to look like post-pandemic, and if it will ever really close that, you know, that per ride gap, you know, cost. It just doesn't make sense, you know, financially, if that continues to be the cost. You know, in a perfect world, freebie is meant to pick up multiple people along the way, and then it becomes more cost effective. And I don't know that approach works here, because we're not in really urban, you know, dense environment. And so, you know, that might not be the last mile solution for us.
You know where freebie might work as a hyper micro transit type of thing within or at the exterior of a station area. So for instance, if you had a semi-high residential development where people were a little bit more than a half a mile away and can get on this goofy golf cart thing and zip into a transit station, that may work, but I can't imagine it works in an estate density residential neighborhood where you're 3 miles away from a transit station. So what I'm trying to say is if you had a Dadeland and you had residential buildings in the Dadeland station area, the half-mile radius, and the people could walk down their building, take their little freebie shuttle zoop, over to the transit center instead of having to walk that quarter of a mile or half a mile, I think it might work there, but I don't think it works taking somebody from, say, Press Gardens, to Dadeland. It's too far a distance and too small a vehicle to work.
So at one point, we did a transit plan. Mayor, do you recall, you may have been on council when we had Kimberly Horn do that?
Yes.
And they looked at having like the people mover and using that like just a circulator, and it came back that it would not work in the village. Because
Why did they say that? I'm just curious.
because we lack density. So I don't know if maybe a long-term goal would be to revisit that last mile approach by doing an analysis of all available options, like Uber. Like, what if we did a voucher program? Like, I don't know if that's a better use of our money to have voucher program for people that want to use Uber to and from the stations, the transitway stations. And we as a community subsidize something like that through transportation fund monies, because it's financially, it keeps people off the road, it keeps cars off the road, it's more sustainable, environmentally sound approach, whatever, however we want to phrase it. But to look at that maybe as more of a long-term look, because I think this goal existed before pandemic, and we were anticipating that the freebie experiment would continue to grow in a positive way. I just think that it's kind of been derailed, no pun intended, because of the pandemic. And I just don't know that we'll ever see that kind of ridership happen in the village.
I think, I don't want to delve into the details of it, but the ridership wasn't true transit ridership. I mean, it was, kind of a kitschy, Pinecresty ridership, and it was, it was a cool little thing. I mean, it wasn't a necessity for anybody necessarily, was it?
Well, people couldn't really count on it, like to get to and from the station. It didn't make sense. So it would end up happening. People might ride it back from the station to their home because there wasn't any time issues maybe there, and they did it to save money. But
so it was totally unreliable.
It was unreliable. It took too long because we didn't have enough of them. And then the more you added, the more cost that would be per rider. So it was just, I don't know. To me, it just doesn't, as much as I thought it was cute and nice and cool idea, I don't know. I even looked at buying the cars in-house and doing it in-house and just having our driver drive around and doing almost like a taxi service for the village, and whether I could do that cheaper. So I don't know, maybe look at these different options. I thought of automated cars, like having, Total Judson's idea of, all these, automated driverless cars, that we would have a fleet that would just, show up at somebody's house, you jump in and it drives you to a station or something. I was even thinking, why would a better use of our money than this?
Why would we do this? I mean, let's think about this. This is not our issue. I think that the freebie we were participating in a TPO program, right? To kind of test the freebie, and we're not the only ones that were testing it, but we did collect data, right? Why don't we communicate back with the TPO and ask them to coalesce their data and provide a recommendation on freebie system wide? I almost believe that we've adopted this as our own project when it's really not our project. We were a data collection agency for the TPO who was going to analyze the data and make an assessment of this, whether this worked or whether it didn't. I think that.
So would the TPO do that analysis, or will we hire like a Kim Horn, like a transit type?
Oh, I wouldn't. I think the TPO would do it. I think they should fund it because, right, this grant came from the TPO, correct?
Yes.
And their objective was to give us the money, use the system along with however many other cities use the system. And they wanted us or Freebie to keep the data, at which point they would give it back to the TPO, and the TPO would then analyze the data and tell us whether, or tell us or the community at large whether Freebie worked at all or whether it worked in certain circumstances. I can imagine that it might work, like I said, in a Coral Gables situation with a lot of density near a transit station. We simply don't have it unless we were just to run transit. Even our side of Dadeland is not very dense, but it's the most dense part of the community. But if you only ran the Freebie from northwest Pinecrest to Dadeland, it work. But the TPO should be in charge of all that. I don't know if we should waste, unless they're going to give us money to piddle around with that study.
We still have that grant. That's why I'm saying, and we committed to the vendor that we would reinitiate to that Freebie program while we still had the grant funds that paid for that program. So I don't know if we just let that play out and then use that data to submit to the PTO to see what they find.
You're just going to run the same Freebie service that we've been running and collect more data on it. It didn't seem to work in the first place.
Well, maybe we can, in anticipation of reinitiating that program, maybe we can ask them to review the data we have now and submit recommended changes to the service provision to see if we can improve our numbers.
Yeah, well, right. So you'd ask them to put together a real first mile, last mile program.
In anticipation of initiating the Freebie service post-pandemic, collaborate with the Miami-Dade County Transportation Planning Organization to review the ridership data and advise on system-wide changes or operational changes.
Right, to achieve an actual first mile, last mile benefit. Improved
per user cost.
No, he said an actual first mile, last mile benefit.
To achieve improved first mile.
And when you really think about that, the last mile is not from Dadeland to 2 miles away. It's almost immediately around the station area. How does somebody get off the train and get to their house? I don't know if Freebie gets you that far. Uber may get you to your home in southeast Pinecrest, but Freebie may be able to get you to your home in northwest Pinecrest, where it's dense and the trip is barely walkable, a little bit more than walkable. I don't know. Somebody should think about that, but I guess that's what they need to develop a true first mile, last mile scope for Freebie so it works. I think we established it doesn't work community-wide for what we're trying to do.
Right. The issue with Freebie is, I mean, we'll look at the database, but I might just off the top of my head, I remember they had recurring. So we were moving people to the transit stations. The question is, how much was that overall, like the cost? Like if you just had one person who always used it and took advantage of it, great. But if you don't have enough ridership, it doesn't make sense, So that's why.
Well, I mean,
you have on a golf.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where, I'm sorry, I'm piggybacking off my phone, so I may freeze again. I'm going to turn off my video so I don't. the preliminary data we looked at showed a whole bunch of things. It's extremely expensive per ride. A huge amount of the demand, ironically, was actually to and from the schools, which is simply because the school district doesn't provide transportation. While perhaps a plurality of the trips were to mass transit, certainly not the majority of them, if I remember the data off the top of my head. There was no reason to believe in the previous scenario that it was cost effective for the village to maintain the service without the subsidy. Even with the subsidy, it was borderline questionable about whether or not we should maintain it. So I think the idea of taking the data, understanding we agreed to continue the contract, going back to the TPO and saying, figure out a way to make this work better for first mile, last mile, and finish that out is the strategic objective. And then once we have that data and that plan and we finished it, we can then go back and decide whether or not we want to work on creating a first mile, last mile, or first 2 mile, last 2 mile master plan to get people to mass transit. I just think it's a little cart before the horse, given the fact that by 2022, 2023, we're going to have BRT. And that means hypothetically, if BRT is an attractive an option as they say it will be, we will have a different mass transit usage scenario, if that makes any sense, right? So within the next couple of years, we're going to have BRT service with a stop at, what was it, 120th, 104th, 120th, 136th?
104th, I thought. and 104th.
Yeah, just 104th and 136.
Okay,
And remember,
104th.
we're also getting the change in the Route 57 bus route, which is supposed to be a circular, right? Yossi, didn't they say they were gonna?
Yeah, the Route 57, I think, is gonna be taken off.
Okay. That's interesting, Katie. I think you're on the right track. You know what we ought to do is maybe study the first mile, last mile options based on the new BRT system, right? And the rapid transit system in total, because you're going to add 2 more places that people would go to pick up transit, right? You've already got Dadeland. Now you're going to add 104th and you're going to add 136th. And there may be a ton of different options that might be used. And you know what, Yossi, that's probably a good grant that the TPO would pay for to study those options around the burgeoning of BRT system. That also goes very well with our land use analysis for the US 1 corridor, where we would be studying different, the land use options around those station areas, which we're
To study the first mile, last mile options to serve the proposed improvements or BRT.
Yeah, the proposed BRT system. Because right now it's relatively, it's almost impossible, right? You don't pick the bus doesn't even stop at 104th Street. And I guess it does stop, well, I guess it might stop at 104th Street, but there's
there's a stop sign there. There's a bus stop there, and there's a bus stop on 120th, but the bus rapid transit stations that they're going to use for the rapid buses is only 136th Street on 104th.
But theoretically, those stations are going to have parking associated with them. They're going to be actual stations, not just bus stops, which they are now. Right now, they're big bus stops with a canopy over them so the homeless people can stay dry. In the future, I'm assuming that they're going to be, they're actually going to be station areas, right?
Which to me is odd because they just redeveloped that entire corner with new businesses. And so like this is why I've completely not understood why they're fixated on 104th Street as the location of that stop. It makes no sense to me when you have the station right down the street from there. It made more sense in my mind for that to be happening somewhere between the 2 Sunnyland plazas, which is our center of town, which would be, if redeveloped, you could add densification there, potentially, and then it would serve better because there would be a destination point. Like, what's the destination on 104th? You know,
Destination on 104th is that west of the transit way at 112th to 120th is all unincorporated dade, but it's 1 acre and half acre residential zoning. Whereas the zoning west of the transit way off of 104th Street is already multifamily and can be upzoned. So I'm positive that from the county perspective, when you look at 104th Street and west of 104th Street, there is the potential for a node where there is not at 120th Street or at 117th Street.
Well, it's commercial already, right? So it's relatively, it can do anything.
Commercial with multifamily behind it, and that whole tranche of what's now residential behind those apartments, behind Williamson Cadillac, can also be upzoned. So believe you me, stuff's going to happen to the west on 104th Street.
Continental Park,
behind
that's where I grew up, so good luck with that. Mary Williams will have a meltdown. That's all I can say. The Continental Park people, oh my God, but whatever, you know. For us, the better approach would be to have something more halfway in our city. Because we already benefit from 2 stations, you know, on our north sector. And so
that bus has left the station. That's not right. There is no station there. It's at 104th and it's at 136. So we ought to just focus on what those 2 things are.
And what we're going to do there, right?
Right. And ask the team. Remember, we promised, I don't know if we promised this, but we had discussions with somebody, probably the county, that we would look to reforming our circulator to service the BRT in a more appropriate manner once the BRT came about. I don't know if that was I think we had those discussions. Maybe this is the opportunity to do that. How can we service the transit stations best with whatever resources we have, which is right now a circulator bus and potentially this freebie thing.
Right. The circulator, by the way, is really popular. The people mover. You know, we just added another bus. People, you know, right before the pandemic, and it was really successful. So ridership for that purpose does work in Pinecrest. So, you know, potentially we can improve.
What's the overriding community goal? Do you think that lessens traffic on the roads as much as in an impactful way, as opposed to servicing the last mile stuff?
I mean, they're packed with kids. I mean, it's like standing room only. So, I mean, you imagine all those kids don't have their parent picking them up. I mean, that's a lot of cars and exhaust off the road.
Right.
Anecdotally, the residents, particularly around the schools, certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, I think yeah, from a traffic perspective, there's a huge advantage. I think it's also an amenity, and we've often said in our planning documents that supporting neighborhood public schools is something that we want to do. And I think for a lot of working parents in particular, that circular is a huge driver to use neighborhood schools.
So I wonder if the county is going to want us, I half think that their approach is going to be, hey, you guys got the circulator money through the PTP, you need to service first mile, last mile stuff. And, you know, I guess our argument would be we are servicing first mile, last mile. It's first mile, last mile around the schools, and not necessarily the transit station. Does the circulator doesn't service Dadeland, does it?
The station, and but it doesn't go to Dayline Mall, but they're just getting ready to change the ability for us to use funding to expand that last mile to areas that are outside of just those transit hubs. So if they approve that, I just saw that Sally Heyman was sent something out. I'll forward it to council that they're trying to get approval to do that. In which case, yeah, then we can expand it a little bit outside of our jurisdiction.
Well, I think then what we have is appropriate, right? We can search for a grant, the TPO can help us study it, and we can look at first mile, last mile options around the BRT system. And that way, we can make a decision on whether we want to service the schools as a first mile, last mile option, or how we would service the BRT system as a first mile, last mile option. And, you know, maybe the county wants to do both. And we have to look at how you get people to the transit station, particularly if they don't have parking at the transit station. You got to get there somehow. And I'm not quite sure how they're going to have parking at 104th Street or 136th Street at this point in time. My understanding was that the private businesses at 136 have kicked all of the transit parking out of the shopping center. So there is no way that you have to be dropped off to use the transit. I think that's true. And that also goes well with our land use analysis that we should be doing, right? That is going to study what the land use mix should be, not only along the US 1 corridor, but specifically targeted around those station areas.
And we'll go over when that discussion comes in a little bit further down, when we can, and later on, if we have to, maybe we have to change some categories and switch things around. So
because I don't all that stuff fits into organizational.
Right. I'm not worried about the transit, because we might end up doing something as transportation, a category that's just transportation or transit kind of thing. So let me see how many come up, because then we may have to just shift a little bit the categories.
We're getting rid of 1.8, right? Because that's fiscal year 2020, 2021. So we're getting rid of that. Let's put some timelines, at least as guesstimates.
Okay, so develop an in-depth financial analysis on revenues and expenditures. This one was for Pinecrest Gardens.
Right.
That was Pinecrest Gardens. That was this year. And then the timeline on that, however you want to document it, whether it's under status as Shannon suggested, or in the text, I don't care.
Yeah, I'll fix it later, that, don't worry.
And then we need some sort of guesstimate.
But I think that under 1.7, you want to give it a date certain by when you would complete it, right?
Yeah, 1.7, I put 2021. So by the end of this calendar year, if not sooner, we're going to do this for budget purposes. So we'll have that done. That's
right. Okay.
This one. Okay, so we're working with these two in anticipation of reinitiating the freebie service post-pandemic. Collaborate with Miami-Dade County Transportation Planning Organization to review the ridership data, the existing ridership data, and advise on system-wide operational changes to achieve improved first mile, last mile cost benefits.
Yeah.
I think benefits is fair, because outside of cost, there's also traffic relief, right?
This year, do you want to give it till 2022? I don't even know when the pandemic and the
I got to look at them and see if they're willing to do this for us, because at some point after people start getting,
I get it.
We can hear you, Anna.
I know, and I just
at some point, as people start getting vaccinated, like I totally anticipate that by June, July, August, we'll kick it back in, but maybe in time for
next year. So that's an end of year, and then 1.9 would be by 2023, because 2023 is when BRT is going to be operational.
Yeah, we should do the analysis and in that time frame, in the interim, so that when they get the BRT operational, we've got a decision on what we would do, if anything, on first mile, last mile. Interesting analysis, though. They say that before COVID hit, 31% of the countywide employees telecommuted, and that got as high as 60% during COVID. And surveying all the employers in the county, they say afterwards, after COVID, that 47% of the employee base will continue to telecommute. So that's a 16% increase in telecommuting, or theoretically, a 16% decrease in trips, which when school is out is basically a 5% decrease in trips. So if the roads are relatively empty, down 16% from pre-COVID, nobody's getting on a bus or a train, really, right? Because you don't have to. You can get there in your car really quickly. So
reality is it would be just anecdotally, I think our population is more likely to be able to telecommute and continue to telecommute because of the nature of their professions for the most part.
Right. I mean, that analysis is fantastic as long as you work in a sector that has that ability. But if you're in a tourism service sector, if you're a laborer on a construction site, which is, Southgate, yeah, you're not telecommuting. Right. You're on the BRT.
Right. No. But what I'm saying is that as a whole,
right,
commuting will be up 16% from pre-COVID. So 16% less trips. I guess what you're saying is that South Dade isn't skewed to that work demographic.
Correct. Yeah, South Dade is our middle class and blue collar workforce that needs to be there in person.
Right. Okay, before I don't know if you guys want to keep going, but if you wanted to at least finish this section, we can look at some of the community dashboard metrics that I was thinking of, just to see if you guys want to dwindle those down, because that'll be what as we do our dashboard, our community dashboard, our scorecard, that we can come up with those metrics. So I picked some of these up from the old ones that we used to have that were part of the original strategic plan. So we may or may not want to do these. It's just, I wanted to capture that here for this discussion.
Let me just stop. We've got about 30 minutes left before Katie and I got to go. So let's not push us over the 10 minutes till 1.
Okay.
I think we both can prepare for our next meeting. And so why don't we kind of wrap this section up, and then if anybody, and I'll start the conversation off about my top 10 list. So maybe we can, spark some imagination and what we're thinking about, and maybe next time talk about we all have that we all want. I think that actually interests me more than these numbers.
Stuff. Okay, so it's your show. I'm gonna put myself on mute and I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick. I'll be right back.
Take a couple minutes to finish up your thoughts on this one, and then we'll get into a prelude to the next conversation.
Oh, okay, no problem. All right, so what we were monitoring and analyzing from data presentation standpoint, we used to have the comparison of unassigned fund balance. In other words, something that was not already designated for emergency set aside or insurance set aside, or the 10%. So we would be able to monitor like the reserve cushion, in other words, an excess of what we would have otherwise set aside, to keep our triple A rating. So that might be something we want to present. The positive of that is that it shows, healthy reserve in addition to that minimum standard, but that can also be used against us. So the question is, I don't know, you put your thinking caps when you look at this critically, like if you were a resident, what would you want to know? Right? Okay, so percent change in mill rate. I don't know that the percent change in mill rate, but how we compare, I thought, to other cities, mill rate is more something. If I was
historically, our mill rate has bounced between 2.2 and 2.4 over 25 years. So as a percent change, it's not really meaningful. I think a comparison is probably more.
That's how meaningful. I thought, comparing us to other municipalities and where we fall would be more what I think would be something a resident might want to know. Millage rate comparison. Millage rate comparison by municipality. Then we used to track the percent change for new revenue sources, because we were always looking for new revenue sources from one year to another. So we used to track that. I don't know if you still feel there's a value in showing the percent change in revenue from one year to another. Same thing, percent change with new revenues for parks, the community center. I don't know. Those are things we used to track. Do you find value in that?
Really? I don't.
Not really.
Fine, great.
Okay, so that's why we took them out at some point. I just wanted to kind of remind everybody. So, all right. The number of online business transactions. This one I picked up from a different, from another city that they monitor, because one of their goals had to do with, conducting more online business and shifting the business functions to more user-friendly transactions that were all based online. So they were monitoring the number of online business transactions.
Well, we might want to piggyback on the fact that we've decided to invest in the software for building and planning for the digital plans review. And just for the next couple of years, in order to monitor that, see what percentage of our plans are submitted digitally and reviewed digitally, just to make sure we're getting our money's worth out of it. As an idea.
Okay, we can monitor the percentage of plans submitted electronically once we go live.
Because it is a lot of money.
Okay. We typically just keep it. She was breaking up. Anna, you froze. Let me just text her again that she froze. Number of social media interactions. I don't know if people care about that or not. Like, what do you and then the final one was percent rating and customer service. I don't know. We still keep track of that internally. So for operating perspective, we do that. But again, what do we want to report to our residents about us from an organizational excellence, financial stability perspective? How do we communicate that we're an excellent organization and that we're financially stable? How do you communicate that?
How do you do this analysis, this last one? Is that referred to some kind of survey that we're going to be doing, or?
Our customer service, we already conduct customer service surveys for all our departments. So we can report on what our customers say. And I think is back.
So, I mean, I understand park building and planning did, right? Like upon
We do it for
completion,
Parks and
but-
Rec, and we try to do it across all the departments that we can, like Parks and Rec, community center programs and stuff like that. We hear you. Yeah, her Xfinity is out. Okay,
Okay.
it's coming back in and out. So any thoughts? Or maybe you guys think about it and then we can regroup afterward on like how do we communicate the level of organizational excellence and or financial stability? Like, what do residents, inquiring minds want to know about the village? I noted, like, in some cases I had we had toyed with ideas like people want to know from a household, median household income perspective, where does Pinecrest compare to other because, you know, we're like the Joneses, you know, and so we want to know, like, anecdotally, people might think, you know, they might want to see how we match up to other areas like Key Biscayne, Coral Gables, you know, Parklands, Weston, like things like that. Like, who do we compare ourselves to? And
I
how do
would
we,
compare, I think you're right, compare ourselves to similar communities.
and so, but what do we want to compare? Like our median household incomes, our level of education, like what do people care to know? And is that really an organizational excellence or financial stability measure?
Why don't we ask our residents? I mean, we can all come up with things here, but why don't we ask our residents what they want to know?
We
Yeah,
can't.
I want to, I don't know if you can hear me, but I want to piggyback on Katie's comment. I mean, I think if we're trying to create a dashboard to tell people at a glance the things that they want to know about their community and their own home and their own property, those are the people to ask what they want to know. And they might want to know stuff that we, on its surface, we think is completely extraneous, but it turns out really matters. So somehow we have to, I don't know, somehow we have to do an Inspire, a virtual Inspire, where we talk to people about what a community dashboard is and what kinds of information.
You know, Niche might provide a little guidance on that, like the different things they rate cities by, compare cities by. I assume they base that on some data they've collected, right? Maybe we can look at the criteria they studied just to see if any of those points might be of interest to our residents.
Yeah.
So we
I
can
can certainly communicate that to Mitch.
we can develop a citizen engagement campaign that inquires about what the community dashboard should look like. Like
Well, what it should look like is more of a graphic design question. I think about what data is meaningful to them.
right?
Because, for example, Jose Oliva, who's a complete lunatic, created this horrible dashboard rating cities, which just about made me fall off my chair. Because, for example, one of the things that he gave people grades on was the average salary of a city employee. So for a city like Pinecrest that has few employees and half of them are union police officers, some of the most highly remunerated, municipal jobs you can possibly have, those cities were downgraded. But people who had tons and tons and tons of really lowly paid people who were earning minimum wage were getting high grades because they were more efficient, right? So all of these metrics can be really weird.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into that business and contract. Like, our goals may be different. For instance, like, we may want to have the highest paid, best employees in the state of Florida because it makes us better. I mean, this isn't the state of Texas, right? In my opinion, where we're just trying to do everything at a rock bottom, lowest quality of service that the public will tolerate price, right? I mean, this is kind of the Pinecrest way, is the highest quality of service. We're not afraid to pay money for great services. So I like having a well-paid staff, and don't want to get into this crazy comparison. Maybe we just drop that whole thing. We don't let other people compare themselves with us. Why would we compare ourselves with anybody else, right? We're better than everybody. There is no comparison.
Right. But we should say, what do you want to know? What do you want to know? How the assessed value of your house has changed over time, or
like council definitely wants us to do a dashboard for the community. So I do think it would be interesting and fun to have them tell us what they want on that dashboard. Like, what would you like to see? And let's see if there's like consensus. What do people want in their community dashboard? It's their dashboard. They're the ones.
Well, I think that I want to see how we've progressed over the years and how we've gotten better, but I don't necessarily want to compare ourselves with another city. Who wants to get caught up in this race with the Joneses that say, oh my gosh, well, Key Biscayne has this, we need it. No, we don't, we're not Key Biscayne, and we're not Coral Gables, and we're not Parkland, we're Pinecrest, and I think we're totally competent and capable of improving our property values and keeping our taxes low without comparing ourselves to other places. Remember that goofy thing that was in the, what plan was it in, that they mandated that our taxes be the 5th lowest of any city?
It was in our charter. It's in our charter.
Yeah, but that's an artificial, that's a totally arbitrary, artificial rule that may or may not be able to be lived up to over time, right? Does that?
Found out we couldn't live up to it.
By the way, I was not suggesting that we want to measure ourselves against other cities. I was just suggesting that maybe we could look at those, at that, you know, the criteria that they look at as things that may be of interest to residents. I was not suggesting that we compare ourselves.
Like, what are they benchmarking? Those.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think Shannon's right, because I think, but
And I kind of like those newspaper articles that come out every year that rank us as like the top, hey, Pinecrest is in the top 2 of these things, right? That's great. Let's not go out and prove it necessarily, but
Right, but it's just as we were exploring what issues may, or what criteria might be interesting to residents. That's the only thing I was suggesting, is that may be a place to look, not that we should benchmark, you know, that we should.
What other people are doing. Okay, I'll come back with some other suggested ideas. I'll clean this up. What I'm going to be working on for the next workshop is, you know, each category kind of doing this whole thing, this whole project, you know, document, and then we'll, you know, pare it down, work on this. I'll update what we have right now for this category, and then we'll move on to the next category and go through it just like we did this time. Hopefully, I can get you something in anticipation of the discussion so that we can already do our homework, look at it, and figure out what we want cut out, and it'll just go faster.
do you want us to email you our top 10 so that we can have like a list of things people sent in and we can kind of knock them off?
That would be helpful. If people sent us our top 10, then I can already start kind of putting that in.
You want to give us a deadline, since we're deadline?
So my list is now short.
well, let's get out.
Can people get me their top 10 by the end of next week?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, got to be your top. And so I was thinking, I'll give you a preview of mine if it gets everybody thinking. I was thinking about the land use analysis on the US 1 corridor, which was, you know, really, that's going to be a very controversial project, but I think that's going to be a very controversial study, but I think it's critical to protect ourselves against what the county may do to us in terms of density. And specifically targeting around potential transit stations, and not like the county's doing, which is corridor wide. So for instance, the county's up their density to 60 units an acre within a half a mile of every transit corridor, which is really a blunt tool, because if you really looked at it, if we don't have a transit station at 120th Street, why would you create a 60 unit an acre development or entitlement at 120th Street? And why would you do that a half a mile into Pinecrest? Why wouldn't you confine your densities to the US 1 commercial corridor, and then further confine them around the transit station? So this kind of preempts the county from any craziness that they want to do with forcing us to change our comp plans. Obviously, we've got water and sewer. I was also, as a pet project, thinking about a multi-use path along 67th Avenue from the canal to the old Cutler Trail, which is at 136th Street. And the rationale for that was that eventually the Ludlam Trail and the underline, the Ludlam Trail would, I believe it somehow connects with obviously Ludlam on 67th. I think it's up in South Miami, and the underline would theoretically go to Dadeland, and there's already a stub out for a multi-use path or a trail on the north side of the canal across from Dadeland to 67th, right beneath or south of the Chevrolet dealer. They just haven't gotten to the point where they would put that trail on the canal. Eventually, if we did that, we would be highly connected. You could almost ride your bike all the way to the airport or Homestead or wherever.
We would, so you were talking about
that's
a shared use path, like widening of the existing path along the length of 67th. Is that what you were saying? Now the mayor froze. Oh my God. Is that what he was saying? Does anybody?
I'm here. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Say it again.
So 67th Avenue
What
shared
was I saying?
path? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. That's what you would.
To connect, to underline. Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do some analysis on that because you know how unpopular a sidewalk might be.
Well, I thought council had already identified this, excuse me, previously, but then we prioritized Kendall Drive.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We can
Those two
discuss.
projects, the 67th and Kendall Drive, were both priorities that council already identified, but we just chose Kendall Drive first.
Okay. Well, we got to get them done. So maybe we, fast track them and figure out how to get them done. Where are our monument signs? You're muted, Yosi.
They're in progress. We got the shop drawings approved for the lettering, and so they should be breaking ground within this month. I can get, if somebody can text me the exact date, then I can report council. Okay, what
Yeah,
else? What are your other wish?
That's it.
I'm just making them color coded so people know where they are and already in the system.
This later, I don't want to monopolize anybody's conversation. But my point on this all was, I don't know if these are good ideas or bad ideas. Some of them are kind of controversial, right? Like anytime we dealt with a sidewalk, God forbid, a peacock or the US 1 corridor, you'd think that the world was coming to an end. So by throwing these out on the table, like you guys may think these are horrible ideas, and we'll see that because only one person will have it in their top 10. And then we don't have to go through the exercise. The whole objective is there are probably things that we all agree on that we should focus our time on, and not the things we will struggle to get a 3-2 vote out of. And that seems to be best. And I think we were smart the last time. Remember, we had the sidewalk in the forbidden zone on 57th Avenue up north to South Miami, and Jim and I disagreed on that. And at least we were smart enough not to tackle that, because who knows how it would have come out, but it would have been a nasty fight. So we just focused on the things that we all agreed on, and we got everything we wanted to accomplish. We accomplished things that other councils couldn't have accomplished before because they didn't have consensus on it, but we were able to do it. And I don't think we left anything necessarily on the table. Like, God forbid, dog park, right? I mean, think about the blood that was spilt over a dog park on previous councils. So we can do anything as long as we have consensus. Let's leave the things that we're controversial about. I think those are for discussions here. We can talk each other in or out of a project here, but after that, let's not take that thing to the end that doesn't have the consensus of the 5 of us, because it'll just mean that we've got confusion and failure. Any thoughts on that idea?
I'll give you my thoughts. No offense
Let me hear it.
to one or more of the council members, but it's rare that this council has a 5-0 vote on anything. So just keep that in
We
mind.
know why that's but you know what? We know why that happens. And it's really, and that's okay. If we get a 4-1, that is consensus in this. I mean, half the time the negative vote is just a negative vote for the sake of it. It's not because there's a fundamental disagreement with it. It's just that, and I'm totally comfortable with 4-1 because that shows consensus.
Okay.
But 3-2, vacillating one side or the other. I mean, I don't know if we have it at that. We've always worked for at least 4-1. And we've been good at it, right? The last group was good at this.
I think it's a great idea. I'm looking forward to this top 10 project. It's kind of like Dave Letterman, but better.
Right. And by the way, I think those are ways that we can all, as a village and politically claim success as we go through time, and we're all on the same team and on the same page, right? There's nothing really to fight about when we tackle the things that we all want. And by the way, look at the other cities that don't do that, and they surround us on at least two sides, and the chaos in those places is mind-boggling. And I don't think any of us want to sit on a council where we're killing each other over silly little things like sidewalks or dog parks or peacocks when we don't have to. There's enough stuff that we never accomplish all the things we all want to do. And so let's not be those places. If we're going to compare ourselves with somebody, let's do it like that. Well, let's not be those places.
Mayor, that document that I'm working off of, the draft, I'm gonna mark it draft, and then I can send it to everybody so you could at least use that chart that we were just looking at as like a, idea generator, so you get to see what's in it, what might come out, and then whatever you guys are thinking in terms of those categories. And we don't have to stick with those categories. Just throwing ideas out. They have transportation as category. They have community and neighborhood livability category, culture and recreation, economic health category, some of the ideas from other cities. Environmental health, they call it, as opposed to sustainability, high performing government. So there's a lot of different ideas. I'm just going through different. So you can feel free to do whatever research. If you see a strategic plan online that you particularly like, I welcome, you sending me that. I'm specifically looking at Fort Collins because they are Malcolm Baldrige award-winning municipality, and WeHo, I think, is really cutting edge. They have a lot of really good stuff on theirs as well. So feel free, though, if you see anything that you like and how another city might be communicating their stuff, to send me what you like about it, because I could try to incorporate that in the redo.
Perfect.
Mr. Mayor, I know you're getting ready to wind down. Two things that the council then want to go ahead and schedule the date for the next workshop. At this time, I know you all have varying schedules, and getting a consensus on a date is usually difficult. And then along the same lines, the manager has requested a special meeting to declare zoning in progress, and she'd like to have it before the March 9th meeting. So is the council amenable to such a meeting, and when?
Guido, what was the notice? Did you find out what the notice requirements were to make sure? Because I know that was the reason we couldn't do it.
The village attorney opined that as long as it was an agenda item, that was sufficient notice. And obviously under our charter, we need to give 48 hours notice of meetings.
Is that it? I mean, we're 3 weeks out from a council meeting. I mean, Yossi, is that imperative? We have to do that immediately?
That's been the recommendation from council, from legal counsel.
I'm sorry to interrupt, guys, but I need to go because I'm using a new platform for my meeting and I'm just not ready yet. So I'm going to go. Just let me know about the dates. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Later. I don't know. You can do it. We can do it as early as next week if you want. If you want to do it.
Just in that case, we do need quorum, remember? Physical quorum.
Yeah.
That's the only issue, and council had already made that decision. We just want to officially ratify it with duly noticed and all that stuff.
I can come to the.
If I need to show up in person, I've got Tuesday the 23rd in the morning flexible, and Thursday the 25th I can show up in person in the afternoon, and I can probably move around my Friday if you need a warm body in the room.
Tuesday morning's good.
I can do Tuesday as well. I can't do Thursday. So Tuesday would be good.
What time?
You
As
9:30?
early as you want to do it, yeah.
9:30, whatever you want, early.
Okay, so 9:30 on Tuesday, the 23rd?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Okay, and again, did you want to set a date for the next workshop on the strategic plan?
You want to do it Thursday, March 4th in the morning? That's Trump's inauguration day, right?
Yes, sir.
What
Okay.
day? Wait, I'm sorry, what was that?
Thursday, March 4th,
And that's to continue the strategic plan?
right?
Yeah.
We do it at, say,
I cannot, I have Zoom traffic court on Thursday, the 4th
okay, what's good for
in the
you?
morning. I can do Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday of that week,
How-
pretty much
how about the
anytime
third?
except Thursday.
Wednesday?
The 3rd?
Yeah, Wednesday is fine.
All right, Wednesday, the 3rd.
You want to start a little earlier, like at 8:30?
Sure.
Not really. How about 9?
9? I'm trying to get as much work done so we don't have to keep having these meetings.
We never get to see each other anymore. This is how we roll.
Okay, 9 o'clock on the 3rd. And that doesn't have to have quorum in person.
I'll send out a notice of both of those meetings later today to the council.
Okie dokie.
All right, thank you, guys. I'll send you the draft so you guys can think about
Okay.
your wish list.
Cool. This has been very, very productive. Okay. Cool.
You think,
Have a good one, everyone.
Take care.
all right, guys,
Bye.
later.
Bye.
Take care, be well.